This is such a great question and topic. I am genuinely curious why your daughter would seek out your mother after all the horror stories she knew about. Everyone has their own reasons, so I always wonder. I looked up mine because I knew my mother was a liar and they might be okay, but they are all cut from the same cloth. They all found kinship when they bonded over turning their sights on me. Well, for starters, my daughter didn't know the horror stories. None of my children did. My ex-husband and I, throughout their childhood, insulated them from the horror stories that weren't going to provide them with anything but worry and concern over their mother and maybe fear for their safety, fear for my safety. None of those horror stories were going to be things that they should be exposed to because they were children. And I think that when you're talking about how we talk about relationships to other people, you have a few different camps. You have the people that are the victim of everyone. So have you ever noticed, I'm out in the dating world, right? And when I meet someone who tells me every single one of their exes had a problem, was abusive, was toxic, all of them, that to me is a red flag that this person, either their picker is extremely broken, which means I'm not for them because, I'm not an abusive person, or they have very little, maybe zero ability to take accountability, to look at what their part to play is. And that's not to say that we don't have several abusive relationships in our life, but if they're all abusive, then, there's something else going on there. And if we really feel that way, there might be something else going on there yet again. And then there's, maybe there's just two camps. The other camp, no, they're straight. There's three. Okay, then there's the camp of over-responsibility. I failed in every single one of my relationships. I'm the bad one. I'm the wrong one. Bad, good. Also those words being black and white. And I just can't maintain relationships ever because I have a problem being in relationships with people. So that's an over-accountability, and it actually does exist. And then there's the middle of the road. I've had relationships that have ended in, I've had two that were domestic violence, and I'm 59. My relationship with my ex-husband, I grew up and we grew apart. I went through therapy. I came into my own. I wasn't the girl he married because the girl he married was a people pleaser and kind of a facade. And ultimately, we just couldn't get through that at the end. So you can say that we outgrew each other. Although I want to take accountability for the fact that I really am the one who changed, and he just wasn't able to grow along with those changes. And that's not his fault. It's also not my fault. It was the circumstances at the time. I've had relationships that have ended because I didn't follow through on things. I didn't communicate well. Maybe I was putting on the facade. I was a people pleaser, and then, push came to shove. I couldn't tell my feelings, so I would just abandon the relationship. There's lots of times where definitely the relationship ended prematurely because I didn't know how to face conflict, because I didn't know what conflict resolution looked like. So all of that was on me. Then there's times where it was mutual. Then there's times where the other person was a toxic person. All different things. You see the difference there? So pay attention, regardless of who the person is who's communicating to you. So in this case, it was your mother, to how a person paints the brush. And if it's only going in one direction, then that's probably a pretty good sign that there's something off, right? Whether it's over accountability, under accountability, no accountability, all that sort of thing. With regard to my children when they were growing up, especially my eldest daughter, who did have a relationship with my mother until she was 5, 6 years old, and she had really good memories of my mother because she was my mother's golden child. And as a result of that, my mother did everything for her that she could possibly dream of and do. Those memories are core memories for my daughter, right? She had memories of my grandparents being very much the same way. And I can only thank my lucky stars that I went no contact when I did, and that she also didn't end up being emmed by my grandfather. Thank my lucky stars. It was nothing more than good luck. And I know somebody's probably going to say, well, why would you expose her to that to begin with if you knew that that's what he was? And well, you knew what your mother was and all that. And the reason is because, and it took me a long time to figure it out myself, and a lot of guilt to work through to figure it out myself. Because if I had a time machine, none of my children would have ever had a moment in time exposed to my mother as children, or anyone, my grandparents, obviously, especially. I was so brainwashed and conditioned into believing that when people did bad things to me, it was because I was a bad seed, a bad child, a bad person, that I deserved it, that when I had my children, I could not literally conceptualize that anybody would do the same to them because they were good seeds. Because all I could see in my children was goodness, and surely that would protect them. I was 17 when I had my daughter. I think that's an important factor in there. My brain was not fully developed, and I had no support system, and there were other moving pieces in there. At the end of the day, I saw, like, my mother, when my daughter was a baby, coochie, you know, oh, and I was going to say the nickname of my daughter, but I don't want to do that, but like loving on her in a way that I had never seen my mother behave before in my lifetime. And so that really doubled down on the messaging of, oh, she can love, and my daughter's definitely deserving of love. I get it. What a mind fuck that was. Anywho, that's why I exposed my children, unfortunately, because I knew that they deserved everything good and I deserved everything horrific, right? Not terrific, horrific, just in case you didn't hear that correctly. As my children were growing and developing, my eldest daughter sometimes would bring up my mother. She knew that she was allowed to bring her up in positive ways, that she could share things that she remembered and she enjoyed, and that there was no problem with that. There was no like, oh my God, you're going to upset mommy if you bring grandma up or anything like that. And my children came to know in childhood that my mother wasn't a safe person emotionally, and that she needed to decide that she was going to show up in a way that was as a safe person. They did know that these people hurt mommy when she was a little girl, and that was the detail that they got. If they had asked more in-depth questions, we would have given them some more in-depth answers. However, those answers would have never been in detail. Because they're children and they don't need to know that those horrors exist, and let alone that their mother went through those horrors. They came to know that I ran away from home for the final time at the age of 13 and that I lived on the streets, and they didn't really have a huge understanding of what that meant because they never experienced anything that would give them a huge understanding of what that meant, other than that things were bad enough in my house that I couldn't stay there, that sort of stuff. By the time my children reached their majority, all of them were curious on some level. I think that's, it's biological, it's primal. The difference was my eldest daughter had things to draw upon. She had memories, and she had a lot of good memories. She also had some bad memories. She had memories of feeling guilty because her brother was treated like he didn't even exist in the room. And it's something that she has told me that she noticed. She told me this like a couple of years ago, and she's going to be 42 in August. She remembers being confused about how it is my mother could really talk in this very harsh, mean, like grossed out way to her own husband, my daughter's step-grandfather. My daughter had 2 step-grandfathers, 2? Yeah, in the time that she knew my mother. And she couldn't understand how she could talk so nicely to her, speak so nicely to her, and be so mean to this wonderful man. And she found that confusing, and she felt guilty, like she was somehow impacting my mother's niceness. There wasn't anything left over for other people, which actually made her prone to quantifying love and affection. My mother showed her love through things, so that doubled down on the messaging of love is quantifiable. And then the other piece of it was she would see how my mother would treat me, and she thought, did I do something wrong? Did mommy do something wrong to deserve that? And that's part of where these types of people create that division. They build a distrust from child to parent, so that they can get in there as the grandparent and be the only person who's trustworthy in the room, kind of thing. And then she would think, you know, I'm sad for my mommy, so she would feel bad for me. There were lots of moving pieces in there. So she has all of those memories, and then the memories of, you know, getting to eat whatever she wanted to, getting new things all the time, you know, just being the center of attention and stuff that, who wouldn't love that? You know, the love bombing. I love being love bombed. I just don't like what happens afterwards. Like I sometimes say, maybe I'll just date a guy during the love bombing stage and just, you know, not get attached. Joking, of course. I would not do that. But, you know, like love bombing feels good is my messaging here. So now my daughter's an adult, and she sought out that side of the family. Relatives. I knew about it. She told me about it. We were open about it, basically, is what I'm saying. And the only thing that I asked of my daughter was that she not share my personal life with my mother, and that I had zero need to know about anybody's personal life on that side of the family. That was my request. And drum roll, imagine this, she respected the boundary, because that's what we do in our family. We respect boundaries. I also let her know that if there were things that came up that she had questions about, that she needed to talk about, that she was concerned about, whatever it was, she could come to me. And not to feel like she can't talk about those people with me. It was more just about the sharing of information that wouldn't be relevant for me in the situation, and that would be unnecessary, because I really didn't need to know what they were saying about me or anything like that. During the time she had the relationship with my mother, of course, immediately started smear campaigning me. My daughter grew up with me. She knew who I was as a mom to her. So coming in all these years later, trying to paint me as the problem and the piece of garbage really didn't go over very well, and it didn't stick. Did it create some sort of division between my daughter and I? Yeah, during that time, I was also being very emotionally immature in other ways that had nothing to do with that. And so while she was in the relationship with my mother, she did go no contact with me for a period of time, kind of on and off. And it was no contact. It wasn't low contact. And I think that there might have been some things, because we've never really talked about it. Maybe if she wants to, we can. We've talked about the things that I did directly to her that hurt her. But there were, I think, some things that might have come up that doubled down on her walking away from our relationship, which again, as a 17-year-old mom who didn't go to therapy till she was 11 years old, there are things that I did, things that I said, instabilities that I created that I should not have done. And it doesn't matter why, it just matters that they hurt my daughter. And we worked through that, and that's over 20 years ago. I always point this out. She comes to me for parenting advice now, so I think we've come full circle. Anywho, during the course of that relationship, my daughter also explained to me that what she was really seeking out was my grandmother. And boy, did I understand that, because at that point in time, my grandmother to me still hung the moon, and I missed her, and I wished that I had her around. It was everybody else I didn't want. And there was no way to go no contact with my grandfather without my grandmother being in the mix. It was impossible. I did not put together how involved my grandmother was with the emming of me. And so my daughter had no knowledge of this. And we didn't really talk about him emming me. My kids didn't have awareness around that. They did not know that growing up. There was no reason for them to know that growing up. When I wrote my book, and my two oldest children actually wrote the foreword of the book, they got all the answers that they could have ever wanted. And this is what they told me. My son in particular thanked me for writing it, because he said that, as much as I knew I could come to you and ask you questions, I just really didn't want you to relive them, and I didn't want to hurt you with the questions. I did have questions, he said. And so it was really like another full circle moment of, I was healing myself with this book, and apparently I gave some pieces of the puzzles, because more than one child, to my children that I didn't even know that they were looking for. And look, they were living their best life. They are living their best life. It wasn't like it was impacting them in this huge way. It was more like they have natural curiosity about the things that happened and why they happened and who did them and all of that. Back to the curiosity, the biology, knowing who they are and all that. The other reason that my ex-husband and I did not share the horrificness that my grandparents and my mother in particular perpetrated against me was because we didn't want our children to get a sense of having that kind of darkness inside of them. We didn't want them to know that they came from people who were capable of evil, because they're innocent children, and we just didn't want to ever risk them attaching who they are to that. Children, they internalize everything. They're half their mom, they're half their dad. If one of those people is evil, then they feel that there's a part of them that must be evil too. That's just instinctually what happens, right? And so we wanted to insulate them from that. And if you're wondering why we were so thoughtful or how we were so thoughtful, well, fortunately for me, my ex-husband had a degree in psychology. I wasn't a therapist at the time. I was in therapy at the time. Not that I don't go back in from time to time now. I think that, it's very healthy to go to someone if for no other reason than to have another perspective and to do some work on our own growth, personal development kind of thing. It's not always about cleaning out trauma, right? So that's why we were so aware. And, manuals. We found the manuals on child rearing. We read every book we could get our hands on about being parents. Me in particular, because I was terrified of repeating anything that was done to me by my family of origin on my mother's side. So fast forward about, 4 or 5 years ago, just to give you I would never have brought this onto the scene with my children if I had known things the way that I know them now. When my adult daughter went to connect with my grandparents in particular, yes, I would have said something. I would have handled it differently and still left the decision up to her. I raised her to be a thoughtful, intelligent, emotionally aware adult person. I trust her judgment. I trust my children's judgment. I raised them to trust their own judgment. I'm not in control of them. It's not my job to be, imagine raising children to set them out in the world at an advantage instead of a great disadvantage. So I had the faith in my daughter that whatever rolled out, she was going to be able to handle it. I never worried about that. A few years ago, I was thinking about a memory that used to be a cherished memory of my grandmother. And as a love-starved, affection-starved child from my mother, I ended up living with my grandparents on and off for a few years, mostly from the age of 5.5 to 9, and that was pretty consistent. The on and off would be like some weeks here and weeks there, maybe half a summer with my mother, that sort of thing. But for the majority of my childhood in those years, I lived full-time with my grandparents. And my grandmother would call me into hers and my grandfather's bedroom. And I would say, definitely once a week, if not more. And she'd call me in for love up, a cuddle. And I loved those love ups and cuddles. I loved the scent of her perfume, which would actually, I think, make me vomit. Now I'm sure of it. I'm sure if I ever smelled that perfume again, it's called Bal de Versailles. I don't know if it's in production. I never want to smell it again. The thought of it gives me a visceral reaction. I loved the softness of her skin. I loved how she held me and stroked my hair and told me sweet things. So much so that, the fact that we were all without clothing wasn't a factor in my little brain. The only thing that was a factor was that I was being loved in those moments. So yes, she would have me disrobe before I got into the bed. I kept that memory in a compartment over here. And then there was a compartment over here where my grandfather would become, for lack of a better word, activated and a part of the cuddles. And where I made the connection was that as my grandfather was doing that, my grandmother would be in the phase of, she would turn over and either go to sleep or pretend to be asleep while my grandfather did what he did. And I did not connect those dots until about 5 years ago, which my adult children are aware of now, by the way, because they've asked questions and because I talk about things online and because I don't want them to find out here first. Not that they really watch my content so much, but just in case, out of the love and courtesy for my children. And occasionally I'll ask them, do you mind if I share X, Y, and Z? I have asked them before sharing all the details of how I share now, how they feel about that, if that's okay with them. When I wrote my book, we talked about it. And not that I'm living my life for my children as they aren't living their life for me. I will forever be their mom. And I want to make sure that I'm caring for them and not doing things that are harmful or hurtful. I know that's shocking. So at the time, going backwards, that my daughter had a relationship with my grandparents and my mother, obviously she wasn't aware of those things. And here's what unfolded that ended in her going no contact with my mother. So my grandfather died at some point. I don't even know how long he was around or if he was around when my daughter, I would really have to look back at the time frame, was in a relationship with my mother and my grandmother. So I don't know where he was in the picture. My daughter never mentioned him. So it's really possible, we're talking over 20 years ago, that he was already dead. I don't know. I do remember when I found out he died that I was relieved, and it was the only thing that I felt. And I felt sad that I didn't feel sad. Not because of him, but because I would rather have family members that I could mourn instead of a childhood that I end up mourning, right? My daughter realized that my grandmother was an alcoholic. And I guess at this point in time, her alcoholism had hit a new height. And my daughter said that when my grandmother died and they went into the apartment to clean it out, that there were rows and rows and rows of empty bottles of alcohol, especially in the closet. Like, it was a closet with these shelves that went around deep, like 4 deep, 4 deep, 4 deep. And I don't know why my grandmother was saving the bottles, the empty bottles, but she was. And so it was really jaw-dropping for my daughter to see that evidence. With regard to my mother's mask was falling, because that's what happens, especially since she thought that she really had a good hold on my daughter, because my daughter wasn't so much speaking to me at the time. And so she thought she won, right? Not that she would feel sad that her own granddaughter doesn't have a mom to have a relationship with. Isn't that the reaction that you would have if you love somebody? Like, that's really sad, and be there for them? No, that's my mother's cue to swoop in and gain more control. And as my mother was doing that, my daughter was noticing some things. And the number one thing that she noticed that put the biggest nail in the coffin before the final nail And my mother, I mean, that should be great for her. She loves coffins. So now she loves cremation. So she's been married 6 times. The last one was a domestic partner. 2 men escaped with their lives, and 4 died while being married to her. And they were all cremated, 1 of cancer. Anyway, back to the nail in the coffin. My daughter had a baby bracelet. And she's had it since she was born. I mean, it was a gift, I'm pretty sure, from my grandmother, and it had her name on it. And over the years, we made it bigger, and she always wore it. She really treasured that bracelet. And the clasp broke. And my mother, who was involved with working here and there in a jewelry store, she would do that to get a discount, because my mother actually didn't do honest work. She did scams. Here's a fun fact. My mother was sued by 2 major fashion houses, one for over $500,000 and the other one for just under $200,000. Would you like to know why? Because she had a fake handbag ring where she was selling fake handbags, and she got arrested. I don't know that she served any time in jail, but she did get arrested and she did get convicted, and those lawsuits did win the judgments against her. So here's my mother, and that's just one of her scams. I mean, she used to turn back car odometers on used cars and sell them. And I'm not talking 1 or 2 cars. I'm talking, she did this for a living for a period of time. And no, we didn't need the money. My mother likes to hurt people. She likes to scam people. She likes to outsmart people. She is a sadist. My mother gets her grubby paws on my daughter's bracelet, and one week my daughter's asking her for it, and she's like, oh yeah, it's at the jeweler. And the next time, oh yeah, I fixed it, but it's in the safe, I have to go home and get it. Or, oh yeah, no, they didn't fix it yet, it's in the safe. Like, she wouldn't keep the story straight. And my daughter's like, she's not giving me the bracelet back. And somewhere in this period of time, my daughter's also asking her for childhood photos of me. Not for me to have, even though I would like to have them, but because she wanted to see what her mommy looked like as a little girl, and especially as a baby. And I've never seen myself in photographs as a baby, well, in anything as a baby. I've never seen pictures of my mother holding me, baby or otherwise. Never seen them. So my daughter's trying to get these pictures. She's trying to get her bracelet back. She's recognizing, oh, you're playing games with me. And there were other things, and passive aggressive and blah, 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 that were going on. But these were the 2 things that were really sticking out to my daughter. Time passes, and I think it was around the time that I published my book, or no, it was before then. My daughter was working on the edits of my book, and she was really hurting for me. And she said to me, I want to have a conversation with your mother, and I want, with my grandmother, whatever you want to call her, and I want to get her to own what she did, and I want her to connect to the family and admit what she did and help heal those relationships for you. And she said to me, because Mom, you shouldn't be alone without a family. And I was like, well, I'm not alone without a family. I have my children. She goes, you know, that's not the same. And I'm like, yeah, I know that's not the same. And I said to her, look, that's not going to go well for you. And you don't need to do that. I'm okay. And she said, yeah, I do need to do it because it's not okay. It's not okay with me. So my daughter, online, FaceTime, talking to my mother, puts that out to her, talks to her about it, is trying to get her to see, you know, the light of accountability. And as my daughter did this, my mother closed the computer down, shut her down, and that's the last time that she interacted with my mother. Not every situation is the same, right? And it's very natural, I think, for children to have curiosity about where they came from. As adults, as parents, when our children are growing up, it's my very strong belief, and I'm also a therapist, that we don't need to share the horrific. And that we don't need to over-explain. What we need to do is ask questions when they ask questions, clarifying questions, so that we give them the information that they're looking for in ways that are age appropriate without defense, right? Because there's no position to defend. We know that we're protecting our children. Along those lines, people go, children need their grandparents. Children don't know what they don't have. They don't need those relationships. Would it be wonderful for them to have those relationships? Yeah. It would be wonderful for me to have relationships with my family and be able to ask them questions about where I came from and what I was like, and just have the familiarity of like that connection and all. It would be wonderful. Do I need that? No. Would I like it? Yes. And I would have loved it for my children to have cousins and all of those experiences. That's not the same thing as them needing those relationships for their well-being and their development. They need healthy relationships with their parents for their well-being and development. Let's be very clear about that. And the love that they have is the love that they will focus on. They will not focus on what they don't have. They don't have a frame of reference to do that. You're not depriving them of relationships. The people who are behaving badly are the ones who are depriving them, not you. Thank you so much for this question, for this topic. I think it's really an important thing for us to talk about that we don't talk about enough. And if anyone has any comments, I would appreciate them in the comments section. And if you have something that you would like me to cover or any other questions, please do drop them there. Sometimes it takes me a little bit to get through them all. I do read them all. And I very much value and appreciate your presence here with me. We do heal together. And I think one of the reasons that I recognized or brought the two compartments together of my grandparents is because of the community that we have here, comments that get made that make me look at things differently, and me just sharing my story in general. I've had quite a few of those aha moments through my sharing of my story and through your comments and questions and things like that. It really does help me too. So I appreciate you all. Thank you for being here, and I will see you soon.